My uncle left me his beautiful Victorian house, but a woman showed up with a lawyer claiming she deserved half because we were related. When I hired a private investigator, we discovered the real truth. I'm a 29-year-old woman and I need to get this off my chest because my family thinks I'm being unreasonable. My uncle Drake, 55M, passed away 3 months ago from complications after surgery. He was my dad's younger brother and basically raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 16. Drake never married and had no children, so when he got sick, I took care of him. I work as a veterinarian at a small clinic, so I was able to adjust my schedule to drive him to appointments and help around his house. Drake owned a beautiful Victorian house that's been in our family for over 60 years. His grandfather bought it back in the 1960s and it passed down through the family. The house sits on 2 acres of land in what's now become a very desirable neighborhood. Property values have gone up significantly in the past decade. Drake always told me the house would be mine someday since I was the only family he had left who stayed close to him. When Drake got his diagnosis 2 years ago, he had his lawyer draw up a will. He showed me the documents and explained that the house, his savings account, and his vintage car collection would all go to me. There was also a provision for his elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, who had been helping him with groceries and daily tasks. She was supposed to get $15,000. Drake kept the will in his bedroom safe and gave me the combination in case anything happened to him. After the funeral, I met with his lawyer, Robert Kim, to handle the estate. The house needed some repairs but nothing major. I was planning to move in within a few months once I finished sorting through Drake's belongings and dealt with some plumbing issues. I had already started the process of transferring utilities to my name. Then 3 weeks ago, a woman showed up at the house while I was there cleaning out the garage. She introduced herself as Diana Chen, 32F, and claimed to be Drake's cousin. She said her grandmother was Drake's aunt on his mother's side. I had never heard Drake mention any relatives on his mother's side, and he was very open about family history. Diana was carrying a large binder full of documents and photos. Diana told me she had been living in California for the past 8 years working in real estate. She said she only found out about Drake's death when she tried to call him last month for his birthday. She had gotten his number from an old address book that belonged to her grandmother, who died 5 years ago. Diana claimed her grandmother always talked about the family house and how it was supposed to stay in the family. She showed me old photographs of people she claimed were Drake's relatives. There were pictures of birthday parties and family gatherings from the 1980s and 1990s. In some of the photos, there was a young man who looked like he could have been Drake, but the pictures were old and it was hard to tell for sure. Diana also had copies of birth certificates and marriage licenses that she said proved her family connection. According to Diana, her grandmother Rose had been Drake's father's sister. Rose apparently had a falling out with the family in the 1970s over money and moved to California. Diana said Rose always regretted the family split and talked about wanting to reconnect, but she was too proud to reach out first. Diana claimed that Rose had told her stories about the Victorian house and how beautiful it was. Diana said she had been trying to research her family history for years and had hired a genealogist to help trace relatives. She showed me a family tree that the genealogist had created, which included Drake and his father. The genealogist had apparently confirmed that Rose was indeed Drake's aunt, which would make Diana his first cousin once removed. But here's where it gets weird. Diana didn't just want to reconnect or learn about family history. She immediately started talking about inheritance rights and how the house should be shared among all family members. She said she had consulted with a lawyer in California who told her that if Drake died without a proper will, she would have a claim to part of the estate as his closest living relative besides me. I told Diana that Drake definitely had a will and that everything was already being handled through his lawyer. She asked to see a copy of the will, which I refused to provide since I'm not the executor. I gave her Robert Kim's contact information and told her she could reach out to him directly if she had legal questions. Diana seemed disappointed but said she understood. She asked if she could stay in touch and maybe visit the house sometime to see where her family had lived. I said that would be fine once everything was settled with the estate. She gave me her phone number and said she was planning to stay in town for a few more days. The next morning, Diana called me at 7 a.m. She said she had been thinking about our conversation and wanted to propose a solution. She suggested that we could share the house, with me living in the main part and her converting the large basement into an apartment. She said she was tired of California and wanted to move back to the East Coast anyway. Diana mentioned that she had experience renovating properties and could help increase the house's value. I told Diana that wasn't possible since the house was going to me according to Drake's will. She got quiet for a moment and then said she had contacted Robert Kim and left several messages. She wanted to schedule a meeting with him to discuss her family connection and what rights she might have. Robert Kim called me that afternoon. He said Diana had indeed contacted him and was insisting on a meeting. He had explained that Drake had a valid will and that there was no provision for any other relatives, but Diana kept pushing. She claimed she had new information about the family that might change things. Robert said he would meet with her once just to clear the air, but he wanted me to be present. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Robert's office. Diana showed up with a different lawyer, a man named Paul Stevens who specializes in estate disputes. Diana had also brought more documents, including what she claimed was a handwritten letter from Drake to her grandmother Rose from 1995. The letter was written on Drake's personal stationery and was signed with his name. In it, Drake supposedly apologized for the family feud and said he wanted to make amends. The letter mentioned that he considered Rose's children and grandchildren to be part of his family, and that he hoped they could all reconnect someday. Diana's lawyer argued that this letter showed Drake's intent to include Diana in his estate plans. Robert examined the letter carefully and said he would need to have a handwriting expert verify its authenticity. In the meantime, Diana's lawyer filed a formal objection to the will and requested that the estate be frozen until the matter could be resolved. This meant I couldn't move forward with inheriting the house or accessing Drake's accounts. I left the meeting completely stunned. Diana had gone from wanting to reconnect with family to potentially taking half of everything Drake left me. She had clearly been planning this legal challenge before she even knocked on my door that first day. The whole story about just wanting to learn family history was apparently a setup. After the meeting, Diana approached me in the parking lot. She said she didn't want this to become a big legal battle. She suggested we work out a private agreement where we could split the estate 60-40, with me getting the larger share since I had been closer to Drake. She said her lawyer thought she had a strong case, especially with the letter, and that going to court would be expensive for both of us. I told Diana I needed time to think about it and discuss the situation with Robert. She said she understood but that her lawyer was prepared to move forward with the legal challenge if we couldn't reach an agreement soon. She mentioned that estate disputes can take years to resolve and cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. That night I called my best friend Sarah and told her everything. Sarah works in banking and has dealt with estate issues before. She said the whole situation sounded suspicious and that I should be very careful about agreeing to anything. She pointed out that if Diana really was Drake's cousin, why hadn't she ever visited him or stayed in touch, especially when he was sick? I also called Mrs. Chen, Drake's elderly neighbor, to ask if she had ever heard him mention relatives in California. Mrs. Chen said Drake had talked about his family history many times over the years, and he always said I was his only remaining family. She remembered him specifically saying that his father's side of the family had died out in the 1980s. The whole situation has turned my life upside down. I can't access Drake's accounts to pay for the house repairs or utilities. The estate is frozen, which means I also can't receive the money Drake left for Mrs. Chen. She needs that money for her medical expenses and is now worried about how she'll pay her bills. My coworkers at the veterinary clinic have been supportive, but I've had to ask for time off to deal with all the legal meetings. The stress is affecting my work performance and I'm worried about my job security. I've also had to put my plans to move into the house on hold, which means I'm stuck paying rent on my apartment plus the property taxes on Drake's house. Diana has been calling me every few days to check if I've made a decision about her settlement offer. Each time we talk, she mentions how expensive legal battles can be and how much easier it would be to just split things amicably. She's also started posting photos on social media of herself at local restaurants and attractions, making it clear that she's planning to stay in town for a while. I've been going through all of Drake's personal papers to see if there's any mention of Diana or her family. So far I haven't found anything that supports her story. There are family photos going back decades, but none that include Diana or anyone who looks like her relatives. Drake kept detailed records of everything, including birthday cards and Christmas letters, but there's nothing from California relatives. The handwriting expert won't have results for another 2 weeks, and Robert says that even if the letter is proven to be fake, Diana's lawyer might argue that she still has inheritance rights as a family member. Apparently the law in our state gives some protection to relatives who can prove their connection, even if they're not mentioned in a will. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to just fight this in court because I know Drake wanted me to have everything. But another part of me is worried about the legal costs and the time it will take. Diana seems determined to get something, and her lawyer clearly thinks they have a case worth pursuing. The whole thing feels like a nightmare. 3 months ago I was grieving the loss of the only family I had left, and now I'm in a legal battle with someone who claims to be family but feels like a complete stranger trying to take advantage of the situation. Update 1: I need to update everyone on what's been happening with my situation. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post with advice and support. Things have gotten much more complicated since then. First, the handwriting expert's report came back last week. The letter that Diana claimed was from Drake to her grandmother Rose was indeed written in Drake's handwriting. Robert Kim, the lawyer, was as surprised as I was. The letter is dated March 15, 1995, and it does appear to be genuine based on the paper, ink, and handwriting analysis. However, there are still some strange things about the letter. The return address on the envelope doesn't match any address where Drake lived in 1995. According to his records, he was living in an apartment downtown at that time, but the letter shows his parents' old address where he had lived as a teenager. Also, The letter mentions events and people that don't match up with what I know about Drake's life in the 1990s. Robert has been investigating Diana's family claims more thoroughly. He hired a private investigator to verify her documentation and trace her family tree. The birth certificates and marriage licenses she provided appear to be legitimate, but there are gaps in the timeline that don't make sense. Diana's grandmother Rose was indeed born with the last name that matches Drake's family, but there's no record of her ever living in this area or having contact with Drake's parents. Meanwhile, Diana has been getting more aggressive about pushing for a settlement. She's now claiming that she deserves half of everything, not just the 40% she originally offered. Her lawyer, Paul Stevens, sent Robert a formal demand letter stating that they have evidence Drake intended to reconnect with the California relatives and that the will should be contested on grounds of undue influence. They're claiming that I manipulated Drake into leaving everything to me. This accusation made me furious, but Robert advised me not to respond directly to Diana or her lawyer. He said anything I say could be used against me if this goes to trial. The undue influence claim is apparently common in estate disputes, but it's hard to prove and even harder to defend against. Diana has also been much more visible around town. She's rented a furnished apartment month to month and has been introducing herself to Drake's former neighbors and acquaintances as his cousin. Several people have mentioned seeing her at the grocery store or the coffee shop where Drake used to go. She tells everyone she's staying in town to settle family business and reconnect with her roots. Mrs. Chen, Drake's elderly neighbor, called me last week very upset. Diana had knocked on her door and introduced herself as Drake's cousin. Diana asked Mrs. Chen a lot of questions about Drake's daily routine, his health problems, and his relationship with me. Mrs. Chen said Diana seemed particularly interested in how much time I spent at Drake's house and whether I had been involved in his financial decisions. What really bothered Mrs. Chen was that Diana asked her about the $15,000 that Drake left her in his will. Diana wanted to know if Mrs. Chen had known about this bequest beforehand and whether I had ever discussed it with her. Mrs. Chen told Diana that Drake had mentioned wanting to leave her something to help with expenses, but that she had never asked for anything and was surprised by the amount. After talking to Mrs. Chen, Diana apparently went to several other neighbors with similar questions. She's been asking about Drake's mental state in his final months, whether he seemed confused or easily influenced, and how often I was at his house. She's clearly building a case to support the undue influence claim. The most disturbing development happened 5 days ago. I was at Drake's house sorting through more of his belongings when I heard someone trying to open the front door. I looked out the window and saw Diana on the porch with a key in her hand. When she saw me watching, she waved and called out that she wanted to show the house to her boyfriend who had just arrived from California. I opened the door and told Diana she couldn't just enter the house whenever she wanted. She said she had gotten a key from Mrs. Patterson, another elderly neighbor, who Diana claimed had been holding a spare key for emergencies. Diana said Mrs. Patterson had given her permission to look around the house since she was family. Diana's boyfriend, Kevin, was standing behind her looking uncomfortable. He seemed like he didn't want to be there and kept checking his phone. Diana introduced him as her business partner in their real estate company. She said they were interested in assessing the house's potential value and what improvements might be needed. I told Diana that she had no right to be in the house and that she needed to leave immediately. She argued that as Drake's cousin, she had a right to see the family property. She said her lawyer had told her that since the estate was in dispute, she was entitled to inspect the assets. Diana and Kevin did leave when I insisted, but not before Diana took several photos with her phone. She said she needed to document the house's current condition for her legal case. She also made comments about how much work the house needed and how expensive the repairs would be. She mentioned that the roof looked like it might need replacement and that the electrical system was probably outdated. After they left, I called Robert immediately. He said Diana had no legal right to enter the house and that I should contact the police if she tried again. He also advised me to change the locks as soon as possible. I had a locksmith come out the next day and installed new deadbolts on all the doors. I also called Mrs. Patterson to ask about the key situation. Mrs. Patterson, who is 78 and has some memory issues, was very confused. She said a nice young woman had come to her door claiming to be Drake's cousin and asking about a spare key. Mrs. Patterson remembered Drake mentioning that he kept a key hidden under a planter on his back porch, and she had told Diana about it. She didn't realize that Diana would actually take the key and use it. The private investigator Robert hired has uncovered some interesting information about Diana's background. Her real estate company in California appears to be legitimate, but it's much smaller than she implied. She and Kevin have been involved in several property disputes over the past few years, including a case where they were accused of trying to claim ownership of a house that belonged to an elderly relative of Kevin's. The investigator also found that Diana has been researching property records and genealogy websites for several years, apparently looking for relatives who might have valuable estates. She's contacted at least 3 other families in different states claiming to be a long-lost relative. In one case, she successfully convinced an elderly man to add her to his will, though he died before the will could be changed. This information has changed everything for me. It's now clear that Diana is not just someone who accidentally discovered a family connection. She's been systematically targeting elderly people with valuable property, using genealogy research to manufacture family relationships. The letter from Drake might be real, but the context around it is probably fraudulent. Robert has filed a motion to have Diana's claim dismissed based on the private investigator's findings. He's also requested that the court expedite the case since there's evidence of potential fraud. Diana's lawyer has responded by doubling down on their claims and threatening to file additional motions if we don't agree to mediation. The stress of all this has been overwhelming. I've had to take more time off work to deal with legal meetings and court filings. My boss at the veterinary clinic has been understanding, but I can tell that my colleagues are starting to get frustrated with covering my responsibilities. I'm also spending a lot of money on legal fees, which is ironic since I can't access Drake's estate to pay for them. Diana has been calling me almost daily, alternating between friendly offers to settle and veiled threats about what will happen if we go to trial. Yesterday she told me that her lawyer thinks they can prove that Drake was suffering from early dementia when he wrote his will, which would make it invalid. She said they have witnesses who will testify that Drake seemed confused and forgetful in his final months. This claim is completely false. Drake was sharp and alert right up until his surgery. His doctors had tested him for cognitive issues as part of his pre-surgery evaluation, and he passed all the tests easily. But I'm worried that Diana might be able to find people who didn't know Drake well and convince them to say he seemed confused. The whole situation has made me realize how vulnerable elderly people are to this kind of manipulation. Drake was trusting and generous, and someone like Diana could easily have taken advantage of him if she had approached him while he was alive. I'm grateful that he had the foresight to make his will clear and store it safely, but I'm also angry that his death has been turned into this kind of circus. I've been getting a lot of support from Drake's friends and neighbors, which has been helpful. They all remember him as being very clear about wanting me to inherit his house, and several have offered to serve as witnesses if needed. Mrs. Chen has been particularly supportive, despite being stressed about not receiving her bequest while the estate is frozen. The next court date is scheduled for early next month. Robert is optimistic that the judge will see through Diana's claims, especially with the private investigator's evidence. But he's also warned me that even if we win, Diana might appeal the decision, which could drag this out for many more months. I never imagined that losing Drake would lead to something like this. Dealing with grief was hard enough without having to fight someone who's trying to profit from his death. But I'm determined to see this through and make sure Drake's wishes are honored. Update 2: I have a final update on my situation with Diana and the inheritance dispute. The resolution was not what I expected, and there were some shocking revelations that came out during the legal process. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks ago, but it was postponed when Diana's lawyer requested additional time to present new evidence. They claimed to have found more documentation that supported Diana's family connection to Drake. Robert and I were suspicious about this delay tactic, but the judge granted the extension. During this waiting period, the private investigator Robert hired made a breakthrough discovery. While researching Diana's background more thoroughly, he found records showing that Diana had been in contact with Drake's former nurse, Patricia Williams, who had helped care for him during his illness. Patricia had worked for Drake for about 6 months before his death, coming to his house 3 times a week to help with medications and physical therapy. The investigator discovered that Patricia had been fired from her previous job at a nursing home for financial irregularities. There were allegations that she had been stealing from elderly patients, though no charges were filed. After being fired, Patricia had started working as a private nurse, which is how she ended up caring for Drake. When the investigator interviewed Patricia, she initially claimed she barely remembered Drake and had only worked for him briefly. But when pressed for details, her story started falling apart. Eventually, she admitted that Diana had contacted her about 6 months ago, asking questions about Drake's mental state and his relationship with me. Patricia revealed that Diana had paid her $2,000 to provide information about Drake's daily routine, his financial situation, and whether he had mentioned any relatives. Patricia had also been asked to describe Drake as being confused or forgetful, which she did in written statements that Diana's lawyer was planning to use in court. But the most shocking revelation was that Patricia had stolen several items from Drake's house during her employment, including personal papers and photographs. She had sold some of these items to Diana, including family documents that Diana had used to research Drake's background and create her false family connection. The handwritten letter from Drake to Diana's grandmother Rose was indeed authentic, but it wasn't what Diana claimed. According to Patricia, the letter had been stored in a box of old family papers that Drake kept in his bedroom closet. The letter was actually written to a different Rose entirely, someone Drake had dated briefly in the 1990s. Diana had taken the letter and created a fake backstory about it being written to her grandmother. When Robert presented this information to the court, Diana's lawyer immediately requested a private meeting. It became clear that Diana and Paul Stevens had built their entire case on fraudulent evidence. The genealogy documents Diana had provided were partially forged, using real birth certificates and marriage licenses from unrelated people named Chen and Rose. The judge was not pleased when she learned about the fraudulent evidence. She immediately dismissed Diana's claim and ordered her to pay all of my legal fees, which had totaled over $18,000. The judge also referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges against Diana and Patricia. Diana left town within 24 hours of the court decision. She didn't even pack her belongings from the furnished apartment she had been renting. The landlord called me a few days later asking if I knew how to contact her, since she had left without notice and owed 2 months' rent. I told him about the court case and suggested he contact law enforcement. Patricia was arrested the following week on charges related to elder abuse and theft. During her questioning, she revealed more details about her arrangement with Diana. Apparently, Diana had targeted Drake specifically after researching property records and finding elderly homeowners with valuable estates. She had hired Patricia to get close to Drake and gather information that could be used to create a false inheritance claim. The investigation also revealed that Diana had used this same scheme in at least 2 other states. She would research elderly property owners, find someone who could gain access to their homes, and then create fake family connections to claim inheritance rights. In most cases, the families settled out of court rather than face lengthy legal battles, which is exactly what Diana had hoped would happen with me. The estate was unfrozen immediately after the court decision, and I was finally able to inherit Drake's house and belongings as he had intended. Mrs. Chen received her $15,000 bequest, which came at a perfect time since she had been struggling with medical bills. She was so grateful and relieved that she cried when I brought her the check. Moving into Drake's house has been bittersweet. I love the house and I'm grateful to finally be settled there, but the whole ordeal with Diana has overshadowed what should have been a meaningful transition. I've been working on repairs and updates, which helps keep me busy and gives me a sense of moving forward. The house has good bones but needs quite a bit of work. The electrical system did need updating, as Diana had correctly observed during her unauthorized visit. I've also had to replace some of the plumbing and do significant work on the kitchen. The costs are manageable now that I have access to Drake's savings, but it's still a big project. Several of Drake's neighbors have been incredibly helpful during the renovation process. They've shared stories about Drake and his love for the house, which has helped me feel more connected to him and his memory. Mrs. Chen has become like a grandmother to me, often bringing me dinner when she sees me working late on house projects. My job at the veterinary clinic has been a good distraction from all the legal drama. My colleagues were very supportive throughout the court case, and my boss gave me a small raise after I returned to full-time work. The stability of my routine has been important for getting back to normal life. The district attorney's office is still pursuing charges against Diana, though she has apparently left the state and is difficult to locate. Patricia pled guilty to elder abuse and theft charges and received 2 years of probation plus restitution. She was also banned from working as a healthcare provider. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm grateful that Drake had the foresight to create a clear will and store it securely. If he had died without proper documentation, Diana's scheme might have been successful. I'm also thankful for Robert Kim's thorough investigation and for the private investigator who uncovered the truth about Diana's background. The experience has made me much more aware of how vulnerable elderly people can be to this kind of exploitation. I've since learned that inheritance fraud is becoming more common, especially as property values have increased and genealogy research has become easier through online databases. Scammers like Diana can create convincing fake family connections using publicly available information. I've also realized how important it is to have trustworthy people involved in elderly care. Patricia was able to access Drake's personal information and belongings because she was in a position of trust. Drake and I never suspected that she was stealing from him or sharing information with someone who planned to defraud his estate. The whole ordeal lasted about 4 months from start to finish, but it felt much longer while I was living through it. The stress of not knowing whether I would lose my inheritance, combined with the grief of losing Drake, was almost overwhelming at times. But I'm glad I decided to fight Diana's claim rather than agreeing to a settlement. I'm now settled into the house and enjoying the space and privacy that Drake loved so much. I've kept many of his belongings and incorporated them into my own decorating, which makes the house feel like a bridge between his life and mine. The vintage car collection has been particularly fun to learn about, and I'm planning to restore one of the cars as a long-term project. Mrs. Chen continues to be a wonderful neighbor and friend. She often tells me that Drake would be proud of how I handled the situation with Diana. While I wish the whole thing had never happened, I'm confident that justice was served and that Drake's wishes were ultimately respected. The legal fees were significant, but getting them reimbursed by Diana's order helped offset the financial impact. Even though Diana left town and may never pay the full amount, the principle of the court holding her accountable was important to me. I haven't heard anything from Diana since she left town, and I hope I never do. The experience taught me to be much more cautious about people who approach me claiming family connections, especially when valuable property is involved. I'm also more careful about who I allow into my home and what personal information I share. The house has become a peaceful refuge after months of legal battles and uncertainty. I'm grateful to have a place that connects me to Drake's memory while also being truly my own. The neighborhood is friendly and quiet, and I'm looking forward to many years of living there and continuing the improvements Drake had planned.